Hey everyone, it should be pretty clear now that Social Security and Medicare are functionally forms of a Ponzi scheme, and nobody seems to make the connection just because it's the source of the scheme. But the Social Security Administration released a summary of its annual reports for 2018, and I just want to run through some of the numbers, some of the troubling or some of the trouble that both of these programs are going to run to in the relative near future. And then I have some thoughts on both of these programs as a whole that I'll wrap up with. But so just to start off with, Social Security and Medicare account for 42% of the budget. And so that's absolutely massive, right? I think the only other program that is of a similar size is the defense budget, which is obviously more of an offensive budget and is far, far too large for any sensible human being. But so, what are the main findings on this report? The overall is that due to demographic changes, mainly that in the near future, we're going to have a lot more old people than young people, meaning we're going to have a lot more people taking from the system than paying into it. And so I'll read that summary here real quick. Both Social Security and Medicare will experience cost growth substantially in excess of GDP growth through the mid-2030s due to rapid population aging caused by the large baby boom generation entering retirement and low birth rate generations entering employment. So they threw the word GDP in here, and I'm no expert, but my understanding of what they're trying to say is that the economy is not going to grow fast enough to tax enough out of the economy to pay for this stuff. That's my interpretation. It could be wrong. Okay, so Social Security is going to run out of its trust fund or its extra funds in 2034. Basically, that means that in and around that time, they won't be able to pay out the full benefits for that program. And going past 2034, obviously how much they're going to have to cut from the program will be in proportion to how much the funding falls short. Let's see. Oh, yes, and starting this year, I believe by this year it means 2018, the trust fund is being cut into. So starting this year, they're not pulling in enough money to pay for all the benefits. And that trust fund as it stands is about $2.9 trillion. And this program is funded mostly by the payroll tax. Now, when we move on to Medicare, it has a similar story. Its reserve is going to run out by 2026, so a bit earlier. Its reserve is about $290 billion. Like I said before, the benefits will obviously fall short compared to how much the revenues fall short. And this is also paid for by payroll taxes. So this is Medicare is also paid for a little bit by money from the general fund, from general taxes. And I think that's a more flexible way of funding. So the two smaller parts will be completely funded because they're just renewed every year and they're not pinned to payroll tax revenues. But both of these programs are paid for by a semi-fixed and maybe predictable fund of money, namely the taxes that people pay. And there's a ceiling on that, right? Because there's only so many people that tax, and you can only tax them so much before, real trouble starts. And so that's the big problem with this, right? It's a payroll tax, or it's a tax pinned to heavily to the demographics. Demographics being young people are working and paying in, and old people are pulling out. And obviously, if there's a large imbalance to it, that disrupts long-term stability. And I'm not sure of a way to overcome that. Well, besides abolishing both programs and doing something over the free market. But these programs, as they are built, I don't think there's a way to fix it. Oh, it's also funny. I was doing a bunch of reading, getting ready for this video, and apparently a decent part of the money that goes into the trust fund for both of these programs is money that's taxed out of Social Security benefits. And from my understandings, from what I read, they tax those benefits pretty heavily, which I don't know. It's pretty funny that like you tax one group of people to give money to another group of people, but then you just turn around and take money from them. It's a very strange thing. Why not just reduce the benefits that you give out to these people and just don't jump through all the hoops? That's got to save money, right? That's got to be a cost-saving venture. So here's another problem with, I think this applies more to the Social Security part of it, as I understand it. So the $2.9 trillion that Social Security has in its trust fund is actually not just a bank account with money in it. It's a account that purchases government bonds. And these bonds stay in this account, and then they mature over time, and obviously there's a rate of return on it. And so there's a positive part of this, right? On the surface, this is a way to kind of prevent inflation from eating up that money and, creating a shortfall. Which is funny because the Federal Reserve purposefully aims for 2% inflation a year. And there's reason to believe that inflation has been much higher than that for a while now. But so you have on one end this private organization, some might call it government, but the Fed's immune to auditing, so I would say it's pretty much not government, since you can't hold it accountable. That's a sidetrack. We have the Fed creating inflation, consistent inflation over time, and then you have these government programs which are, tasked with managing money over the long term, but that's complicated by the fact that inflation is eating at the money that they need to hold onto the value over the long term. So that's a darkly funny thing to me. So I've also been doing some reading about, there's an argument about whether or not putting this money into a trust fund that purchases government bonds is a good or bad thing. Whether it amounts to the government rating the Social Security trust fund, or the money being borrowed out. I've heard people argue that it's more of an investment. The fund is an investment because it has rates of return over time. But I think there's an important caveat to that belief that kind of reduces that argument to where it functionally, it also is not doable long term. And it's because of this. So when you buy government bonds, the government takes that money, gives you a promise, and it spends that money. So in a sense, it's spending the money from the Social Security fund, and it's promising to pay it back. But that is assuming that in the future, the government will have the money to give back, to pay out these benefits. And I'm pretty sure if you've been paying attention, the government's been running really, really huge deficits recently. And if this continues, and I don't see why it won't, I'm pretty sure all of the estimates and forecasts that I've seen have predict deficits going out into the future. The government won't have money to pay these things back. So that kind of diffuses the whole, well, the government's just going to pay it back, right? No, they're not. And I think a lot of the time, this gets kind of squirrely and it feels pretty complicated and convoluted, but I think part of also, like when the bonds mature, sometimes they don't pay back the interest in money, they pay it back in bonds. So they just take the interest that was earned off the bonds, or just the whole thing, the matured principal and the interest, and instead of giving the money back, they're like, we'll just roll that into a larger bond, and we'll just pay you more money in the future. And so it's I think that's a pretty big reason the whole thing is just a Ponzi scheme, because right now the people that are paying in now are paying for the people that are taken out. And the only way for the people that are paying in now to get money back, to get benefits, is for people, future taxpayers, to pay into the system to pay out the benefits. So there's a problem with the reserve. And even the reserve that we have is going to run out in 2034. Not only that, but we're also facing drastic demographic changes. I haven't done a ton of research on it, but from everywhere I've heard, demographics are changing quite massively. People are having less kids nowadays. Even just in my own family, both my parents came from families with 7 or plus children. I have 2 brothers, and one of my brothers has and both of my brothers have just a few kids, and I'm probably going to have only a handful too. And so I think there's even, just in the short term, in the small window of life that I get to observe, birth rates are plummeting. And I think that obviously that changes per demographic, per ethnic group, per nation of origin. But overall, for nations that are highly developed, birth rates have been dropping a lot. This is happening across all over Europe. This should not be new information for anybody. So yeah, this is a program that is poorly designed. The funding is poorly designed. The savings is poorly defined. It's not good for the long term. And then possibly the most damning part of it is that the thing that damns it the most is that it's compulsory, is that it's backed up with a threat of violence. Everyone has to pay into it, no matter what. Now, I feel like I have to explain this every time that, government programs are backed by violence. And I don't mean this in the way that, oh man, there's structural violence in society. Some groups are disadvantaged and some groups are held up and things like that, nebulous things like that. I mean literal violence. So imagine, let's just move the goalpost just a little bit. because since payroll taxes are pulled out before you even pay them, like before you even have a chance to resist, they've taken your money. But so like income taxes and other stuff like that, if you stop paying them, eventually you get a letter, and they're gonna say, "Hey, you owe us money. Please pay us money." If you don't do it, they'll send you a letter with stronger language in it, and possibly an increased amount of money that's due because of a fine. And then eventually, if you just ignore them and resist, they'll send people to your door and take you to jail. Take it, and steal all your shit. They'll take your house. They'll, sell off your assets to pay the debt that you have with the state. So this is very serious. You're compelled to participate, and that, again, should not be new information. But so then, if there's no ability for people to walk away, for no ability to look at a deal and say, you know what, this is not good enough for for what I think I need, I'm going to walk away. Well, then there's no need for that government program to improve, because that's the main thing, right? That's the main tool people have for pressuring other people to perform better. Like my fiance, I have to treat her well because I want her to stay. And if I don't, she can just leave. I mean, you should treat them well for other reasons, because you're a good person, you have empathy and all that good stuff. But that works for everywhere in life as well. Your employer, your friends, businesses that you interact with. It all needs to be voluntary, because if it's not, then the person that's being coerced can be pushed into any deal, and they can't pull back their consent. And so that's the problem with something like this. Social Security and Medicare and all the fundings and stuff, this is very complicated stuff. I mean, this takes years of reading and stuff. Like, I've been paying attention to this stuff for a long time, and I still don't understand it. But I do understand it enough that the incentives are bad, and the forcing of people to participate in a program removes any incentive for the people running it to run it well, or to even tell you the truth. So that's it. I think that's the main point here. Oh, well, maybe a side point, maybe a supplementary point is you all need to start saving your money. Like, I think everybody, especially the young, but you need to start finding ways to save money on your own, because this program will not be around for us. Even if it's still around and it's just paying out a small portion of the benefits that it once used to, it's not going to be enough. I don't think it's enough to live on now, as far as I understand it. But in the future, oh no, you're not going to be able to depend on this. So when you hear politicians talk about this stuff and how they're going to fix it, I plead with you, please, if they give a solution or talk about a program that introduces more voluntary interaction, more of a give and take, more of peaceful interaction, well, then go for that one. For me, I say we trash the whole thing and encourage individuals to save money. It's the only ethical way to do it. It's the only just way to do it. It's the only long-term way to do it. Everything else, all the incentives are bad, and you're going to give power to all the wrong people. All right, thanks for listening. Bye.